Hello and welcome to the 3D Blu-ray Bunker. This is where I look exclusively at films on 3D Blu-ray, not to do a movie review, but to focus almost entirely on the 3D, with just a short word at the end about the film itself, and this time I'm looking at Gods of Egypt. This one has an aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1, and it was post-converted into 3D. One of director Alex Proyas' earlier films, I, Robot, was one of those few films that were given a 3D post-conversion several years after they were made, and whilst a lot of that film's compositions looked tailor-made for 3D, unfortunately the conversion was a bit of a disaster, with the industry testing the waters with a largely automated system, which basically wasn't fit for purpose, and the result was quite nasty. So with Gods of Egypt, I don't know whether the post-conversion was something they began planning for during pre-production, or if it was decided on late in the game, but either way, as Alex Proyas had demonstrated with I, Robot, he's got a naturally three-dimensional sense of composition, and almost every shot in this film looks like it was designed with 3D in mind. Like, there are several ways you can photograph a row of people, maybe with the camera facing them directly or tracking across them, but this angle is the one that translates into the best 3D view, and it's almost comical the way the film uses this angle across multiple views. And when I say comical, I mean in a way that could make a 3D fan giddy with laughter at how they capture the perfect angle every time over and over again, with the 3D doing a great job of separating each person from the next as the view draws back into the screen. To me, this all looks like very obvious and deliberate 3D composition, but that's really only just the start of it. Like when you effectively double up on that view and have something stretching back on both sides, you're in 3D heaven, and again the film is absolutely riddled with these views. These are all magnificent 3D compositions, with good quality conversion work being done on them to bring the richness of the Z-axis staging into 3D life. Whether it's a bunch of slaves hauling rocks or a line of troops with their spears, these views just keep on coming, and they're wonderful. For all the criticisms the film had, and God knows it had a lot of them, bad 3D composition would definitely not have been one of them. And speaking of iRobot's 3D conversion, it had some crowd shots where the 3D looked fairly wretched, but in these views there's an excellent job done on separating every single person into their own 3D space, and chuck in a dollop of confetti too, and the 3D view is all the more spectacular. There is one area of 3D where some people might find the film lacking, and that's if you're a pop-out junkie. I know that some people feel that a 3D movie's not really delivering the goods unless it throws some stuff away out of the screen, and that's fair enough, and whilst I'm not one of those people, it's a viewpoint that if you hold it, you might be disappointed by how little of that there is present in this film. And I don't think this is a fault of the conversion team. It just looks like they had few opportunities to wrangle much into negative parallax. For example, during this fight sequence, both of them are wielding weapons that you might expect to be shoved out of the screen, but they're hardly ever filmed in a way that would give the stereo converters the chance to do that. Like I say, this doesn't bother me at all, and whilst it can be fun to see a spear or some such emerging a long way out of the screen, I think there's an incredibly delicate balance between doing it so quickly that you barely register the 3D, and holding the shot for so long that it looks gimmicky, and that's a balance that I think far too many 3D films get wrong. In fairness, there is certainly an argument that a daft fantasy film, like this one undoubtedly is, would be an ideal candidate for exactly that sort of daft 3D, and that this type of film should be less worried about classy 3D compositions and more concerned about delivering some theme park style obtrusive 3D. So if you like it in your face, you may be less enthusiastic about Gods of Egypt's 3D than I am. That's not to say there's nothing going on in front of the screen. Quite a lot of things are in negative parallax, but usually not in an obvious way, like the little stand in front of him here is fully in front of the screen, and so's the cup that he's holding out here, and not just Chadwick Boseman's arm, but the entirety of the great man himself is in negative parallax. As ever though, it's always best when something that's placed into negative space is something significant to the story, so it's good to see the Eye of Horus here emerging out of the screen, and I think this film's smart enough with its 3D to hold these shots for what feels to me like just the right length of time, enough to appreciate it, but not so much as it becomes too intrusive. When Hitchcock made his 3D film Dial M for Murder, he was praised, and quite rightly, for being so restrained with his use of popping anything out of the screen, that when he got around to doing it at a moment of extreme importance, the effect was supremely powerful. And whilst I don't really mean to compare Gods of Egypt to a Hitchcock offering, in terms of one element of its 3D use, maybe I kind of do. So, because the film uses so much moderation when it comes to poking stuff out of the screen, when we get to this moment, where he's holding out something of huge symbolic and emotional importance, and it comes a nice long way out towards us, I think this piece of 3D is way more powerful than it would have been if they'd popped spears and snakes and whatnot out at us every 5 minutes. In fact, if they'd done that, I suspect this would have been totally lost in the mix, but as it is, I think this bit stands out as an absolutely excellent use of 3D. It's not all great, and one of the things the film doesn't really do anything with are faces, which are mostly very flat looking, which in shots like this can give a bit of that cardboard cutout look. For me though, when the majority of the 3D is so good, or when the film's flat faces look like this, the lack of solid 3D in these views doesn't really bother me much. There's also the odd conversion error here and there, like the reeds in the swamp smearing over each other a bit in incorrect 3D space, but this is something that trips up the best of them, and it's very infrequent here. And when the camera's not moving, they actually do a good job of separating some of the vegetation. And my most minor criticism of all is that it's possibly slightly disappointing that the film never gives us a 2D point of view shot from the one-eyed Horus. That would have been a nice little 3D joke, even if only for us lot. The film throws in one or two hyper-stereo shots, which I'm a big fan of, so this massively detailed view as we sweep over the city looks superb with its slightly exaggerated stereo view. And I love the framing of so many shots, like as we pass through opened curtains. Again, it's also overtly three-dimensional, and a similar move through a curtain of rock. Multiple structures are designed perfectly for 3D on both a small scale like this, or feeling the confines of the cage they're in here, but also on an epic scale, like when we fly in a dizzying way through this grand design full of depth and spatial detail. There's a bit that reminded me of a moment in The Force Awakens where Rey's sliding down a sand dune, and in 3D its height and steepness are far more apparent than in 2D, and it's exactly the same with this pile of treasures here. I love this shot where here in 2D it's quite hard to make out what we're looking at, but in 3D the separation between all of the elements makes it vastly clearer. And a similar thing with this view of the golden ocean of creation, where the 3D places it in clearly separate space to the clouds beneath it. So this movie is one of those great examples of the 3D disc being immeasurably superior to the 4K disc. To my eyes then, this is a film that is stuffed with great 3D views, which are in the main all about packing loads of detail into separate 3D space, drawing us deep into the screen. Maybe my favourite piece of 3D is this journey into the underworld, with so much going on in 3D space, it's a little thrill ride all of its own. And there are a large number of those reliably great 3D views looking down from a height. This often works to emphasise the scale of what we're looking at, and this is filmmaking on a fairly grand scale, or to emphasise the sense of peril, like here, and sometimes, for good measure, a bit of both, like when they're battling away up on this platform here. So then, just a quick word about the film itself, and the question, would all of that great 3D count for anything if the film was a cosmic stinker? I think this was maybe the most derided film of 2016, and for the most part actively disliked and even detested by critics, many of whom poured scorn and spewed bile on it, and generally threw as much loathing at it as they could. And there's no denying that the film is quite silly. It's about a battle between gods, who are giants that live among mortals, and they've got the ability to turn into weirdly metallic CG creatures. It's all very easy to mock it and dismiss it as overblown nonsense. But I'm truly unembarrassed to say I'm not a mere apologist for this film, but I'm a totally unashamed fan of the thing. Firstly though, its one important criticism does need to be addressed, which was that the casting was a shameful piece of whitewashing, with the majority of the characters being played by white actors. I would offer the film a degree of defence in that there are some prominent non-white actors in it, and it's also not irrelevant that the film is about as far from being a serious historical piece about ancient Egypt as is possible to be. Ultimately though, it does remain a valid criticism, and maybe casting actors like Rami Malek or Mina Masood could have done the film some real favours, assuming they'd been available and interested. I'm more inclined to call out its casting as being racially insensitive rather than actively racist, which is what it's been accused of. Ultimately, if anyone has a zero-tolerance approach to the film because of the casting, I'd respect that opinion, even if I don't think it's completely reasonable or fair. But I truly don't understand how so many people fail to find plenty of entertainment in the film. I thought its story was good fun and well told. There was the age-old mismatched partnership routine at the heart of it, which I thought was done perfectly well. Its critics said the film was unintentionally funny, but the bits I found myself chuckling at were obviously supposed to be amusing. It played to me like an old-fashioned fantasy movie, and I absolutely mean that as a compliment. I really liked its light tone and thought the cast captured the spirit of the thing well, including a typically enjoyable hammy term from Gerard Butler, Elodie Yung, who's an example of the film not being guilty of purely white casting, also very beautiful and exotic, and gives a really charming and playful performance. She's also a strong female character, but the film was never going to be given any credit for that. Maybe Courtney Eaton's character is more of an old-school damsel in distress, but the critics probably didn't mention her much either, as she's another one of the film's non-white actors, and another who I think does a good job of bringing life to the part. Nikolai Coster-Waldow might have been cast because he was widely known as Jaime Lannister, but it's good to see him not just rehashing his Game of Thrones performance, but bringing something new to his horrors here. And I thought Brendan Thwaites played the young hero with a good deal of affability too. Rufus Sewell and Geoffrey Rush are in there, both giving performances nicely aligned to the film's tone, that's to say, knowingly over the top and suitably diverting. Whilst it might not be considered to have been dear old Chadwick Boseman's finest hour, I thought he was good fun as well. There's unquestionably a lot of genuinely imaginative and very well realised design in the film, things like Ra piloting a sky vessel dragging the sun over a flat earth and doing battle with the darkness on a nightly basis. It's the kind of thing that people would heap praise on if someone like Terry Gilliam did it, but far too many people only seem to want to belittle some of its less successful CG work, which there certainly was some, but in my book, judging a film by the quality of its special effects could leave Spielberg's Jaws dismissed as a bit of a turkey, whereas I think it's one of the greatest films ever made. Now, I'm not for one moment saying Gods of Egypt is by any means a classic, or that it's groundbreaking and in any way important, but I can only think of a tiny number of big-budget blockbuster movies that I'd say fit any of those descriptions anyway. I thought it certainly made a nice change from yet another comic book superhero movie, yet another white boy comic book movie I might add, and I found it entertaining with a fun story and full of characters who I thought were exactly as likeable and unlikable as they were supposed to be, and with plenty of perfectly fine action set pieces too. Basically, if this film had come out when I was 10 years old, I know I'd have loved it and found it exciting, funny, charming, and majestically otherworldly. I'd have hissed at the villains, cheered at the heroes, and been utterly bewitched by its two leading ladies. And now, over 4 decades later, I'm very happy to have had pretty much exactly the same reaction. Whether that's because there's enough of that 10-year-old sense of fun and optimism and joy still in me, or it's just because I'm as big an idiot today as I was when I was 10, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But I do think that if you've been put off buying it because of all the negativity surrounding it, then I'd say, firstly, as a 3D fan, you'll definitely find it worth a watch just for its many fabulous 3D views, and as a film fan, there's a real possibility that you might be pleasantly surprised to find it not only not nearly as bad as you'd heard, but more to the point, that it's actually really good. On the other hand, if you do find yourself in agreement with the critical majority and think the film's awful, then apologies for wasting your time, and I hope we can be happy enough to celebrate and enjoy the fact that people can have different opinions, sometimes wildly so. But, and I want to repeat this, I genuinely think Gods of Egypt is a thoroughly enjoyable film, and I don't hesitate to recommend this 3D Blu-ray. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and if so, I hope you'll join me again soon for a look at another 3D Blu-ray. Until then, thanks for looking in on this one, cheers for now, bye bye.